good, people? I just love saying that, and we are live. I get a kick. I just tickle myself over this. Welcome everybody to our IDC, the Institute for Diversity Certifications Career and Collaborations LinkedIn group with Dr. Rhea and I, and we are here. Well, I am so excited. I did a video. Did you see the video I did this morning? I'm just so giddy about our special guest. But before we bring our guest on, I want to pass it over to Rhea so that she can introduce herself. And I want to give Rhea, I want to give you some flowers. We've had a whole year together. This is our first year together. And it's just been such a real treat to work with you. It's been fabulous. I don't want it to end. We only got one more month to go, and this is it. So, just thank you for everything. We got one more session, and then we got to talk. We're going to get offline and talk about what we're doing for next year. If you're going to stay on and all that, but we'll do that offline. Rhea, will you introduce yourself and say hello to everybody?
Well, first, thank you so much. I really appreciate the flowers. It has been a good and enriching experience engaging with you, Victor, getting to know you behind the scenes, and then having the opportunity to do LinkedIn Lives. I hadn't done it before, so I appreciate you going ahead and being like, hey, this is what I started. Let's keep it going. I'm like, sure, why not? So I appreciate that. But hello to everyone who is either watching it now or in the future. My name is Dr. Rhea Horton, and I am the CEO and founder of Career Bliss, LLC, a career coaching business that I've started to really provide support directly to early career talent as well as women of color in the corporate space, giving us all that we need to thrive in the corporate setting. So that's a little bit about me.
Awesome. So as you saw in our postings, today is the evolving role of those three scary letters, DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we're going to be talking about what's happening in organizations as well as in the consulting world. We'll talk a little bit about market trends, the tech stacks that are involved. Perhaps we may get into that depending on what kind of time we have, the workforce shifts, and the reshaping of what's been happening around diversity, equity, and inclusion in terms of strategy. And again, what's happening in the consulting world. And I cannot think of anybody better. I have a hall of fame of icons. There's Patty Lee, who I worked under over at Wyndham Hotels and Resorts, Mary Frances Winters, Dr. Shirley Davis, and then y'all, guess who we have today? We have Dr. Nika White. And I have to read this. I can't just, bring her on just like that. I need to read through. We won't read through all of it. You go make sure if you are not already connected, make sure you get connected to her, go to her website. Let me tell you about Dr. Nika White. She is an international speaker, author, and management company and founder who helps people and organizations maximize their effectiveness, potential, and capacity. Her work is rooted in organizational development, systemically operationalizing strategic, intentional efforts that empower leaders, transform cultures, and humanize how we work and live. And I was all in. This is me. We are so aligned, Dr. Nika White. She is an award-winning consultant, keynote speaker, published author. I'm trying to be like you, published author. I love it. An executive practitioner. Dr. White has partnered with Fortune 500 companies, government agencies, mission-driven organizations to spark innovation and belonging through real-world frameworks and immersive learning experiences. One more thing. She's recognized by Forbes as one of the top D&I trailblazers. There is so much more, but we got to get into this content. Dr. Nika White, will you say hello and anything you'd like to say before we get going?
I am delighted to say hello, and I would like to say something before we jump into today's conversation, and it is just to extend also my appreciation and gratitude to you, Victor, and to you, Dr. Rhea, for the invitation to collaborate with both of you as we learn with and from each other, and hopefully impart some knowledge to this community as well. I was so pleased when you mentioned Shirley Davis and Mary Frances Winters. Those are two individuals that I highly respect and look up to as well, and so it sounds like if my name is being placed in the same sentence with theirs, that I'm in good company, and I take that as a compliment. So thank you kindly.
My pleasure. And one more thing I got to say, The reason I got my certification was because of Dr. Nika White. She had posted about this some years ago, 4 or 5 years ago. And I didn't know her at the time, but when I was like, "Oh, what is this?" I've been thinking about doing a certification, and so went ahead and did it. Greg DeShields, if you're on, I started doing it. I found out he had just done his certification, and they are actually the plug for IDC. They're actually doing refreshers now,
Mhm.
and I did just take the course last week. It is a good course, and I think something that is well needed, so that we're ready and prepared for what's been happening today. So without further ado, Dr. Rhea Horton, take us away.
All right. I'm so excited for today's conversation. I'm sure many of our audience within the DNI space has experienced the transition within the field that's been taking place for over a year, especially at this point. And so we wanted to ask about that transition, and Dr. White, your experience with that transition as well. So in particular, how have you transitioned your work within the DNI space? I know you talked about broadening your impact. So we'd love to hear more.
Yes, I would love to share more, Dr. Ria. So it is interesting. We are definitely at this crossroads, and we have been for quite some time, where if as a DEI practitioner, we aren't evolving and we aren't finding new, creative, innovative ways to continue to sustain the work, we're going to find ourselves becoming more and more irrelevant. And I don't want that for any of us. And so the bottom line is that diversity, equity, and inclusion, I may use the acronym, but I always like to at least start saying each one of those words, so much power behind those words, but it is no longer an initiative or a program. It is an operating system for how organizations build trust, how in which they help to facilitate a sense of belonging, and also how they're able to shore up long-term value from a business imperative perspective. The market certainly is shifting, and but the need also for human-centered leadership continues, and in fact is increasing even more so because of the attack on DEI and the anti-DEI movement. And so I want people that are listening to this, particularly those who care deeply about this work and they're trying to find their place right now at this juncture, I want them to understand that this evolution, it's moved from this compliance conversation now to cultural competency in a much more deeper fashion. Today's workforce is demanding workplaces that honor humanity as much as performance. And I think that that is a really key turning point for all of us to gravitate to. Hence, Victor, as you talked in the beginning, when you were sharing a little bit about my background, I show up to the work that I do by saying part of our charge is to humanize the way we work and live. And I even will say that sometimes we need to switch the order and say how we live and work, because that's critically important for us to recognize that there's so much value into both of those aspects of how in which we consume and live our lives. The last thing that I'll share regarding the market shifts question that you've raised, Dr. Ria, is technology and demographic shifts. Those are very well alive and they have to be taken into consideration. And those shifts, while some people believe that it is replacing diversity, equity, and inclusion, it is not. It is reshaping it, or at least it should be. And we need to make sure we're evolving with it. The last thing that I'll share, because I know part of your question was, how have I evolved? I know we're going to get into this a bit more, but what I'll say at this point in time is that I also recently rebranded. I was Nika White Consulting for the first 8.5 years of being in existence. And up until maybe a couple months ago, I rebranded to Nika White and Company. And there's a whole story and strategy behind that, which I'm sure we'll get into.
Thank you for sharing that. A couple of things that really stood out to me was the fact that we need to honor our humanity, and that there is, shifts that are happening and that we need to stay abreast of those. And something that I always think about, because I'm a tangible type of person, is I think about skills. Like, okay, all of these shifts are happening, even within AI technology. We want to bring humanity into that. How do we do that? And so it makes me wonder, how does one even go about identifying the new skills that they may need to learn to be able to keep up with all of the shifts and transitions that's happening? If any advice for that?
Yeah, absolutely. There are a couple things that come to mind, but I'll start with really just talking about relaying it to the transition question that we started with. It's really important to focus on expansion and not departure. I want to say that very clearly because I will be the first to say that when the anti-DEI movement first began, I was 10 toes down, standing firmly in my belief that no, I'm not going to refer to it in a different way. I'm not going to change the nomenclature because they're just going to weaponize whatever type of new name that we give it. We're going to stand firm in this language because it has power. And I continue to take that stance. And then what I quickly realized is, Nika, are you trying to be right or are you trying to sustain the work? And while my gut was telling me I'm trying to do both, what was most important is to be seen as sustaining the work by any means necessary and not so much as being, called right, even though I felt that the work of DEI was very much in right standing, that everybody should be standing behind. So don't think about whatever kind of shifts or evolution or new skills that we're trying to bring to the fore as a departure, but think about it as an expansion. What do I mean by that? I think that oftentimes when we think about DEI practitioner work, we are cultural strategists, right? We are leadership advisors. We are workplace cultural experts. We are emotional regulation, specialists, because that's an important aspect of how in which our leaders show up to the workplace. Because organizations don't just need more initiatives and programs, they need transformation. So when we think about all of those titles or those skill sets that find its way into the work that is under this larger umbrella of diversity, equity, and inclusion, we are talking about conscious leadership, change management, and things that are going to continue to have staying power no matter what people are saying to devalue DEI. And so I want us to think about it in that way. The advice that I would also give to individuals who are considering how in which they may need to tap into some skill sets that perhaps they have not amplified as how in which they show up to the work is, let's make sure that we're shifting from selling DEI programs and initiatives to solving organizational problems. That's where the transformation comes in. And as long as we're solving problems, that's when I think we're going to be able to continue to find traction and momentum in having our value to be honored and recognized and sought after. The bottom line is that language that ties to DEI is risk management. It is talent optimization. It's innovation, cultural transformation, leadership capacity. And so I think thinking about it in that broader, expansive way really helps us to get more aligned with what are some of the skill sets that we know are not going to fall by the wayside, even in the midst of this volatile time for this important body of work.
Whew. Wow.
I know, right? So cool.
I'm gonna be going back, rewinding this, and playing this over and over. I just love this.
Yeah.
I was with you late last year saying I'm not changing anything, but it is
a lot of us were.
There is risk going on, right? There are folks that are coming after organizations and filing these ridiculous lawsuits, but you still have to defend yourself against that. So I so get that.
And Victor, I do think it's important to say that for those who have made the decision to continue to lose that language, no matter what, diversity, equity, and inclusion, that is not a judgment. That is something that I think each practitioner has to come to a conclusion on their own based upon who they're serving and how they want to continue to sustain the work. And so I think that it's critical for us who are doing this work to not create any type of infighting or placing judgment upon how someone else may be showing up to this work.
Yeah.
I think we need all of the many different ways in which we are trying to apply the pressure to keep the work going. And so, the bottom line is that DEI value grows when we speak in the language of the people we're helping. And for some organizations, while the media will tend to maybe allow us to think differently, there are many that are still committed to the very language of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I don't want us to lose sight of that.
Yeah.
But those adjacent skills are so critically important. I think about even emotional intelligence and, people analytics, storytelling, facilitation, governance. There's so much that we could draw from our deep wealth of diversity, equity, and inclusion, superpowers, and thought leadership that I think will certainly help us to show up as best as possible during this time.
Yeah. Yeah. I do want to go back to branding, but one other thing I want to make sure that practitioners understand that I've seen, the mistakes that I've seen happen is when you do rebrand some of the language, you need to make sure that you are talking to the team and making sure that they understand what's going on and understanding why we've made the pivot, why we've changed some of the language, but what kind of work is still happening. And we need to make sure that the team understands that and sees, behind the curtain. All too often, I think we've as leaders, make a mistake where they don't want the team to understand the mechanics, but if they understand the why, I think there's much more goodwill that happens when that occurs. So
I agree. I think it helps to create a strong alignment. It's not enough to rebrand and just expect everyone to understand what the strategy or the thought process was behind it. I think that we need to be just as bold with our communication strategy behind the rebranding. That is where we need to pull out what are our pillars, what are our core values, and how does now the evolution of the brand still align with those core values. And sometimes it may require a shift in how in which we are identifying and prioritizing our core values. But I think that is critically important. And that's not only from the perspective of organizational leaders who are doing the work of DEI within their respective organizations, making sure that all of their, colleagues are aware of what that shift is and why, but equally important for the consultants or the practitioners who are servicing different organizations. Are you also making sure that your internal team, we made sure that our entire team was aware of what we were doing? Because you can imagine that some people could question, well, are we moving away from it? Is it no longer important to us, right? And so you don't want that to create any type of trepidation in how in which you're able to serve your clients and do the work.
So let's dig a little bit deeper on that. You had a strong brand to begin with before this started, and now. So can you talk about, your personal brand, for your company, and then how did you go about developing that? And then what are you doing now that others can glean from to walk away with some tools there?
No, great question. I've had to reflect on this a good bit, especially when we were working on the rebranding process. And so I'll give you a little bit of historical context. When I first launched my brand, it was under the name of Nika White Consulting. And at that point in time, I wasn't sure where I wanted to take the organization. I wasn't sold on whether or not I wanted to be a larger enterprise with several different, staff and employee resources, or if I wanted to, kind of operate under the model of doing majority of delivery of the work myself. And then, maybe when the need arise to, contract with other 1099 consultant partners who are also in the space. What I quickly found was that, operating in a small capacity it felt good to me, right? And so, but as you can imagine, like so many other DEI practitioners, after George Floyd's murder, the floodgates opened and there was so much opportunity to where immediately overnight, so many DEI practitioners were inundated with requests for services and our expertise to help organizations to navigate the complexity of what we all were very visible to and witness because it was hard, it was violent, it was definitely impressionable, and it created this moment of reckoning where people felt called to action. Fast forward, and at that time, I literally had to more than double my team overnight. And what I found was going from a really small organization where I was delivering most of the work to now a team that, more than doubled overnight, where I had other people executing the work. I found that my name, Nika White, was becoming a little bit of a barrier. While it had great equity power in it, because I worked really hard to build my brand and really hard to make sure that I was delivering with a reputation that had a lot of social proof, what I did not realize was that it was going to also require me to be cognizant about how does NICO-wide consulting now also let the broader community recognize that I'm not the only deliverer of this work, right? And so we then started kind of referring to the company as NWC more frequently than NICO-wide consulting, just to minimize my name and show the breadth and the reach of all of our staffing resources. So fast forward to recent times, when George Floyd's murder took place, we all recognized that overnight, because the market was really heavy and in demand, there were many people who were not already in the space of DEI consulting who became DEI experts and consultants overnight. And I'm not here to place any judgment or question someone's capabilities, but I know that there was a surge of all of this newness in terms of consultants that were in the space. And what was happening is that, and I'm talking from my own experience, there were a lot of organizations who were their companies, their organizations and cultures were compromised because they had maybe aligned with some of those individuals who were not able to really create the transformation that they had hoped for. And even in my mastermind groups, I hear some of my other friends who are actually in this space as well talk about how there was a lot of cleanup that had to be done after that point. I mentioned that in context of getting us to today and now. I felt that it was critically important to remove the word consulting from my business name because I work with a lot of global, corporations, and I had two in particular that alluded to the fact that because the consulting world was so oversaturated right now, and we're in this economic downturn, that they were giving direct orders to not contract and partner with any company that had consulting in its name. And it was because, right, wrong, or indifferent, it was perceived as waste, almost as though if we are in this critical point of really trying to be very diligent and of our fiduciary responsibilities, we need to make sure that we're leveraging all of our internal resources instead of spending all of these dollars on external resources. And I think that also part of the challenge was that so many people right now, with the rifts that have been taking place and a lot of people being displaced because DEI, the anti-DEI movement, they, as a bridge, became consultants, and in their consultancy, it's very much seen by many as this is just temporary. So maybe these individuals do not have the in-depth skill sets or capabilities to really service us. And I don't think that that's the right perspective necessarily so, but it is a reality that's gaining some speed and some traction. I've even heard more along those lines, since those two organizations have made reference of it. So for me, it was just a timely decision to go ahead and start that rebranding process. And then we became NICO-wide and Company. And so still NWC, so that it does not disrupt, the way in which we've been referred to, but yet and still it is subtle, but I think that it is incredibly strategic. And we have already seen a difference that has made. And so I'm glad that we made that call.
Yeah, I think it was a great call. Particularly now, you see these, so many organizations that are laying off several thousand people at a time.
Yes.
And folks are not adding headcount; they're just holding where they are. And so, given that environment, what I'm seeing along those lines is this new term that just continues to pop up is fractional work, fractional chief people officer. I just changed my title probably 3-4 weeks ago on my LinkedIn headline. And I think that is where things are going more so. So yeah, absolutely.
They want specialties. They really want that subject matter expertise. And sometimes just the label of consultant does not yield a level of confidence around, subject matter expertise in a particular niche. And so even if, someone is really wedded to that language, I would say make sure that you're following, that language up with the specificity around what is that subject matter expertise that you're delivering upon. But you're right. There's a lot of people that are being laid off, and the fractional approach, I'm seeing it as well. And what people don't realize is that fractional CMOs or CHROs, whatever the case may be, CFOs, they are still, in essence, 1099 contractors.
Yeah.
But they're, it's just another way of being able to help avoid some of the perceptions of the negative connotation that can be associated right now with that language.
Yeah. Yeah. Tell me, I don't remember if it was your podcast or a conversation you and I had some time ago, but you said you used this term, and I remember jotting this down in intentional inclusion. And I want you to talk about that and your thoughts around empathy in your leadership. Could you talk to us about that?
Yeah, I'm happy to, Victor, and thank you for this question. So the word intentional has become a really important part of my brand since inception of my business. My first book was entitled The Intentional Inclusionist, and
Mm,
it was all about helping people to grow as inclusion-minded leaders, and not just leaders by way of title or position, but by leaders in terms of our influence. And we know that if we define it that way, that really looks at people across all layers within the organization. But the reason that intentional became so important part of how I wanted to show up for this work is because of the power behind that word. We cannot be passive about the work of equity and inclusion and belonging. And intentional really helps to amplify that. It has a certain look and feel to it. Intentional is very calculated, very calibrated, very action oriented, very strategic. There is a belief, a strong belief behind it. And I believe that when we think about all of that, it helps us to shape the way in which we will respond and engage with the work of inclusion, which is not to be passive, but to be very intentional and proactive and to expect results because we're planning for results. And so that is why I have made it such a fixture as part of the NWC brand. And you referenced my podcast, vodcast, it's called Intentional Conversations. And again, it's just a carry through of how we want to show up to, the important topics that we address, which is all about diversity, equity, and inclusion and how it intersects with business and leadership and so on. And then your question about empathy. I think empathy is at the heart of intentional inclusion. It really is, because we have to first be concerned with caring about people that are left behind and that do not have an opportunity to compete successfully in the marketplace and have full opportunity for success. And so empathy, I think, is a leadership technology. We think about technology in terms of software and AI and things of that nature, but I also want us to just bring it back to the very core of what technology is. This is a leadership technology. And so how in which I also like to show up to the work of DEI relates to empathy, and how I like to make sure that that is centered is through storytelling. I do a lot of work around storytelling for inclusion and connection. When we share stories, we are listening to fill words. We are being able to experience as closely as possible the lived experiences of someone else, where we may not ever have any other way to get proximate to that. We deepen our compassion and our care and our concern. And the bottom line is that it's something that belongs to all of us. We all have stories, right? We all can connect through storytelling, and through that vulnerability of sharing, we're giving others permission to share. And I think that's where empathy can deepen. So it increases trust. And I think there's just so much value to centering storytelling as a way to further the work of empathy in the workplace today, workplace and beyond.
Wow. You know what this reminds me of? In fact, now I think it just came to me at the top of the show. I was trying to remember who my top 5 were. I couldn't remember the 5th person. And I think you were on her. I think that's when I met you. Did you join Jennifer White? Were you on
Brown? You're talking about Jennifer Brown. Yeah.
Brown? You were on her. That's where I met you. You were on hers. And I used to call that, Jennifer, I hope you're listening. I used to call her segments that she did was like my spa treatment. It was a DEI spa treatment, because you just feel good listening. It just brought me back to that right now, hearing what you're talking about in terms of intentional inclusion and empowerment, and how that makes things work for our workforce. And it just feels so good. Thank you for sharing that. And now Jennifer, right? She's Jennifer Brown Speaks. She's doing that as well. What are you seeing in terms of, from your vantage point, in terms of what consultants are doing, aside from the rebranding portion? But what other trends are out there that you're seeing in terms of how they're being, consultants, fractional folks are being selected by these organizations. What's the latest on the street? I think folks are going to want to hear about that.
Yeah, and I'm certainly interested in Victor and Dr. Ria hear your perspective on this as well, because again, we're learning with and from each other. But I can tell you from my experience, there's definitely longer sales cycles that are occurring right now, right? And that's for those who are committed to the work and they are trying to sustain it, because they're having to do a lot of in-selling of how do we do this and still protect ourselves in this current climate. No one wants to be targeted, right? And certainly no one wants to be, having to face some type of legalities around how in which they are doing this work. And what I'll say to that is that if you are a non-federal government entity, then all of those executive orders, they are just that. They're executive orders. They're not the law. And so I keep expressing that, because while I know that oftentimes, a lot of corporations will take their cues from what's happening from a federal government perspective, I do want to remind you all that it is not law. Those are executive orders. And so just make sure you're keeping that top of mind. I'm also seeing more short cycle engagements with the expectation of, maybe down the road, we can establish a longer term kind of value and partnership. So I would say for those consultants that maybe are getting slightly frustrated because maybe the longevity of the opportunities that are coming your way is seemingly non-existent, just understand the climate, and it has everything to do with it. There is a higher demand, as we've talked about, with specialization. And not only just specialization, but specialization with measurable impact. We know, because the IDC drills this home, and I continue to use this language, there is a keen difference between activity versus impact, right? And so we have to make sure that we're driving that impact and that we are helping our clients to connect the dots to how the work we're doing is driving that impact. And then the other thing that I'll say is a deepened appetite is what I'm seeing for consultants who can integrate the work of DEI with other very important pillars like leadership, technology, change management, right? So organizations are hiring for expertise, but they are retaining for partnerships. And the way that you're going to be able to yield yourself as a viable partner, long-term partner, is when you're connecting the dots of DEI very impactfully through measurable results of areas that extend to leadership, technology, change management, things that are really making a difference and moving the needle in the overall performance and outcomes of organizations.
Yeah. For me, I will just be perfectly frank. The folks that I know in that space, they haven't been getting any business. There's just been, and then the folks that are not in that field, it's because of just so much misinformation out there. I can't tell you how many people still come to me saying, isn't DEI dead? Isn't it? It's not happening anymore. Aren't we not allowed to do it? Hearing it, isn't it against the law? No, that's not the case. I am seeing a lot of work that's still in that world where we're talking about inclusive environments. I'm seeing a lot. There's in fact even more of an uptick of things that are happening where folks are doing even more egregious microaggressions that are occurring now because they think that that's okay, and it's never okay in the workplace. And so
this political climate has given many individuals a license and agency to feel rightfully so showing up without regard to humanity, right? And so, but when we have such a strong stance that's coming from an administration, that helps people to feel comfortable in taking on those sentiments, then, they're going to be much more bold with it. So to your point, Victor, I think that this is a time more so than ever that we need to kind of amp up, the work as many ways as we can. I think that was really a reason that I also shifted my mindset, a while back from, no, I'm going to stay right here. I don't care what they say about the names, diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'm going to, be really firm in my stance there. To me, it's more important to be able to still continue to do the work. And I think that we also have to give practitioners in this space the ability to assess the risk for themselves and to make their own call. We know that this work is really, really hard. It impacts us as well, even though we're practitioners, right? And so I don't want any type of shame or guilt or blame to be pointed at anyone who decides that during this season where the circumstances are what they are, that they may not want to continue serving as a practitioner in this work. I think that everyone needs to arrive at those decisions for themselves by assessing their own personal, capacity for what's happening and how to navigate that.
Yeah, and the work is getting done. I from the corporate side, my daughter works for a company I won't say, but we all have this service in our homes that we happen to watch a lot, or when we're on the go, and they still, it's all, the inclusion team that she's on is very active and making good work for that organization. So it is happening. Though things are
And
going.
there's so many examples like that. So,
Yeah.
if folks are feeling like what they're hearing in the media is really all truth and the DEI is dead, then I just encourage you to do a little bit more digging, because there definitely are tremendous organizations that are still continuing to to even deepen how in which they're showing up to this work. It may look a little different, but again, we have to make sure that we aren't putting on blinders to how in which the work now is evolving across, from organization to organization. That's important.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to add to the earlier question where I've seen some evolution for consultants. And you mentioned it is maybe it's embedded in leadership, how leaders show up. I think that will continue to be an opportunity area because I think, Victor, you mentioned earlier, people are just showing up kind of raw, in the raw state sometimes, and that means there's increased microaggressions, there's many things that's happening in the workplace that's going to, I think, create a pressure cooker where it's going to need to shift to give more attention to how leaders are leading and showing up because of the anxiety that they might be contributing to, or basically an unsafe workplace. And so I have seen an uptick of that, a psychological safety. Sometimes it might be captured a little differently, but essentially the intention of how do we create a stronger culture through psychological safety is another area where I've seen opportunities for consultants in this space to show up, as well as, of course, team dynamics is right in there. And so they've had to rebrand a little bit, maybe adjust their language so that it attracts rather than repels, in an effort to, as you said, Dr. White, to maintain the sustainability of the work. Like that is the intentional goal. And some have decided, look, I'm not going to die on a hill holding on to these acronyms. If it's really that much of a turnoff for you, fine, I can use a different terminology, but the meaning that I have in my mind and how I execute is still the exact same. And so to me, it just shows, and I wish it would be more received as that, but to me, it shows the work that I was doing is still the work that I was doing that has the impact that you're looking for. I'm just calling it something different, but it's literally still the same work with the same impact, which means y'all are making a whole fuss over something that wasn't dangerous in the first place.
Yeah, that's so true. I love the fact that you brought up the lack of safety that people are feeling right now. I think that's one of the big things that I hear consistently. And, when we think about psychological safety, it is a through line, from belonging. If you don't have a strong sense of belonging where people feel valued, seen, and heard, then if they're always questioning whether or not they belong, and when they don't feel safe, you definitely question whether or not, you belong. And if they're questioning that, then they're not showing up, bringing their best to that environment. And so then, if you frame it that way, organizations should take heed to, yes, I should care because I need my people to show up at their best, because that has everything to do with productivity, performance, having a culture where people are, really wanting to collaborate effectively, because we know that that drives innovation. So again, there's so much that I think that we need to uncover and help people to connect the dots around that perhaps they just aren't seeing, because they're so clouded by what they've heard through this anti-DEI movement related to some of the words that have routinely kind of surfaced in this broad conversation. So, kind of training people to unlearn what they've learned, and make sure that we're reframing it in a way that serves the work and humanity best.
Absolutely. And along those lines, I was going to ask a little further about trends that we've already started talking about and pulling out. Thinking about also with technology trends, even workforce shifts, how people are interacting in the workplace, or maybe being more reserved in how they're interacting in the workplace. I wanted to know how that is shaping the execution, so to speak, of DE&I strategy within consulting work. Have you noticed your approach has shifted to answer these new other workplace trends in technology and workforce values and so forth?
Well, it depends on really which change and trend we're talking about. I do think there have been a number of strategies that have evolved to align with what we're seeing. First and foremost, when we consider the distributed workforce, we recognize that there is a lot of opportunity there in terms of how in which we are maintaining a culture of support and valuing all employees during a time when people are not necessarily able to be proximate to each other in the same physical space. And so I think that that plays a role as well when we think about diversity, equity, and inclusion. It definitely has impacted belonging. And leaders must now build, connections across distance. I also think about Gen Z and how Gen Z demands authenticity and structural equity. They are not about performative gestures, right? And they're very vocal about that. So if we want to make sure that we're maintaining attraction of Gen Zers, we're going to have to think about, well, how is what they value from a culture perspective showing up in our workplaces? You mentioned technology a couple times. It allows data-driven DEI, but it also can expose a lot of gaps and biases. While AI is incredibly powerful, the adoption of AI and how in which it's being integrated and employed and developed is something that organizations are having to pay closer attention to, because of the irresponsible and unethical use, which can lead to those gaps and biases. So that's something that I know has found its way into how in which we like to at NWC guide clients who are really trying to do the right thing and value DEI, even in an AI perspective. So a couple other things I think could be very applicable to consultants or subject matter experts and specialists, given a lot of what we've already referenced today, is people need roadmaps and toolkits, and they need it to be provided in a way that's very practical. I like to talk about it as a toolbox. They need multiple tools, and they need to be trained on which tool needs to be pulled given each individualized circumstance, right? There's not a one size fits all. And I think that the more that we can provide individuals with that, and I'm not just talking about top tier leadership. Yes, that's a really important level. But I think that sometimes we forget to let that trickle down to middle management. Most often, the people that are touching the majority of the individuals in an organization is middle management, right? So how are we equipping them to be able to hold space and to be able to have the tools to ensure that they are modeling the type of way in which they want people to show up within the organization? That also means to identify internal champions and maybe put them through what I like to refer to as communities of practice. My firm has been really big in developing different communities of practice, whether it's around storytelling, around inclusive leadership, around emotionally regulated leaders, and other topics as well. But when you think about communities of practice, we are learning with and from each other. And there is an outcome that can't be realized when it's just kind of singular, individualized learning, and that is the collective output. When people are coming together and they're problem solving around real issues that they all are maybe experiencing or that they know is part of the organization in which they all belong to, there is this greater power and initiative to really be responsible for collaborating even more deeply to try to create solutioning that can carry the organization into the next level. And so I think that, those are just some of the ways in which I believe consultants can really make themselves incredibly valuable, on top of the ongoing light touch advisory coaching aspect in which they're providing to organizations on an ongoing basis. Your job is not just to deliver, it's to equip organizations to sustain the work. Think about it that way.
Yes, I love that continual message that you're sharing about, is this sustaining the work and how to best sustain the work? Because that, I believe, is a primary concern or even complaint from anyone who has worked with a consultant. They come in, they do their thing, it looks okay, it looks great, they leave, and then it kind of
Right.
falls apart. And then you're kind of essentially starting over again, doing the same thing. And so I love the fact that you're talking about toolkits and things that are more tangible for especially middle managers to use. So it, one, makes their job as easy as possible, where they can automatically apply it. And I thought about the situation where I was working with talent acquisition on a particular project, and they so happened to mention that they were evaluating a new tool that so happened to have AI. And I was like, okay, well, this new tool is going to evaluate potential incoming candidates. I'm thinking about, how is this tool written so that the AI might not bring in some unintentional bias? And so I asked, oh, okay, so how are you planning to evaluate the AI function of the tool, and how, like, where is it going to show up? How is it going to show up? And I started asking these questions. You could kind of tell there was a little bit of a, and I do think that they tend to be, they meaning middle managers in a sense, tend to be the ones who might make these decisions. Oh yeah, let's use this tool, or let's use this resource, or let's start implementing this new process. Well, if they don't have, let's say, a toolkit of some sort, a checklist of some sort, to, like, you know what, let me just double check this and make sure I'm thinking about everything. I'm including whoever all needs to be included in this decision. I'm slowing the process down and ensuring that bias isn't included, and I'm double checking the right types of people across different fields and so forth. Then we can see the work sustain. Otherwise, it would have been a situation where they do their best and they make a decision, and you get what you get and just hope for the best. And then that's how things may go awry, because opportunities are missed for sure.
Yes. No, that is so good, Dr. Ria. And speed has become, such an inhibitor of the ability to adopt and integrate AI responsibly, ethically. And I think that we need to continue to call that out. I am a fan of AI. I'm a fan of the power of AI, but not just AI, responsible, ethical AI. And I think that one of the biggest ways that organizations can serve its employees and its consumers best is to make sure that how in which they are adopting AI and integrating it is very intentionally focused on doing it ethically. And that includes, of course, a lens of DEI. I mentioned, I referenced before, that there's so many gaps and biases that exist because the data behind the technology is only as good as the people who are coming together to develop it and to test it, people who are being asked to test it. And so if we don't have that level of diversity, making sure that we aren't unintentionally creating harm, then we are probably going to find ourselves creating harm and not even know it and realize it. So getting to market, while I understand that could be, certainly a point of attraction to where we, think I can fix everything later, brands are suffering because people are calling that out, and they're not afraid to go to social media and to other media outlets to make it known their the harm that has taken place. And so I partnered with LinkedIn. I'm a LinkedIn learning instructor, and one of my most recent courses was on the intersection of DEI with AI, and it was all about helping individuals to think more intently about what to do. And there's a lot of case studies, uses that I included in that learning, learning, just to bring it full circle. But yes, we have to be intentional about the work of AI adoption. And that extends to transparency too. That is critical. Be transparent with how in which we are, developing these systems. AI doesn't just make decisions for us; it accelerates decisions we've already made. So even more reason why we have to make sure that we are building it responsibly.
Absolutely. And clearly I lost my lights, but somehow I still have internet. So we're just going to go with it.
All right. We'll keep it
But
rolling.
the last little thing I wanted to say on the AI, because I know we got to start wrapping up soon, is the fact that I learned maybe about 2 years ago that about 90% of the content of AI is driven by Western society, because that is the one who has most access to what has been put into the internet. And it doesn't include many other voices. So that's also something to consider, is that what it has been exposed to and consumed already doesn't even represent a full spectrum of the world, of perspectives, and so forth. And so with that, there's always a need to be cautious with the information that it provides. I too use AI, and quite frankly, AI has been around much longer than people think. They think
Absolutely.
it just popped out of nowhere in the last 3 years, but it's been around much longer than that.
Yeah.
And we do find it useful in a lot of our everyday technology and interactions that we don't even, input as, oh, AI helps execute, whatever that is. But I do think when it comes to integrating it with DE&I, there is like that extra lens that needs to go in with either evaluating the content to make sure it's right on par, makes sense, it's validated, or it is missing things. Let me know that, or I can be intentional about that and how I adjust it so that it can be appropriate for whatever the use is that it's intentioned to meet. So with that, I'll pass it over to Victor to start closing.
Very valid points, Dr. Ria. Thank you.
Yeah, and one thing I will say also on AI that I think when you do absolutely all of that you've said needs to be in place, but even once that happens, just everyday use, I will tell you that when ChatGPT, as an example, my assistant Chad, as I refer to, will lie to your face, right? And so you need to make sure that you are qualifying what you get. And I will tell you, I was working on a project and I was asking for authors, podcasts, and I asked Chad, now, will you please do a DEI audit on what you just gave me?
Yes.
And I'm not even going to repeat what I initially got, but it was absolutely, not something that I would normally have put out. And so looking at that, so you want to make sure that you say, I simply said, will you use a DEI lens and tell me whether these podcasters, these authors are something that would help folks that are looking for resources to expand. And so anyway, I will leave it there. One other thing I wanted to say before we start wrapping things up is I want to thank Lisa Sanchez. She dropped a comment in here early on, about 17 minutes in to the hour, saying, I'm struggling with this now, regardless of what you call it. We still need to do the work organically. It must be woven into the fabric of the organization, which anchors in organizational culture. So Lisa, thank you for those comments. If anybody else has any comments or questions as we're wrapping up, please just go ahead and drop it in there, and we'll make sure we give you a shout out and read off your questions. So Dr. White, communities of practice. Talk to us about bridging the gap between DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion expertise, and the actual concept. DEI is not a thing, as we've already established, right? It's a whole body of work. So walk us through that. Tell us what your thoughts are around that.
I think the best example, because I am in deep with it right now within my practice, is, and I've referenced this a couple of times, but it's in communities of practices and turning those concepts in that, cohort-based learning into capabilities. And so, when you are a part of a group of like-minded individuals who are after the same goal, you are creating this ongoing learning ecosystem. And through that, there's a shared accountability that just organically takes place. And it can be nurtured to where it even creates deeper accountability in terms of what the collective output is going to be. But also you find that collaborative problem solving, surfaces in a way that maybe the organization hasn't seen before. Communities of practice, from my experience, it helped leaders to embed diversity, equity, and inclusion into everyday decisions and behaviors. And that's what we want. We want people to start seeing it as a responsibility that we each own, not just those who carry the title of CHRO or HR leaders, or even those who carry the title of like being someone that's in the lead of diversity, equity, and inclusion work, but everybody. And I think that's a great way that you can help facilitate, again, ongoing sustainability when everyone feels like this work belongs to each of us. DEI thrives when it moves from department to shared identity. And I think that there are so many different ways in which we can connect everyone to the work of DEI, even if you're not necessarily a part of maybe one of those historically marginalized, underrepresented groups. And I think that's critically important too. And it's actually a mistake that I think many practitioners have made in the past, is to leave certain individuals out, almost as though this is not a body of work that impacts positively all of us, regardless of our demographics. And then I want to go back to, relating this to how consultants can take this advice and implement it into their DEI work in terms of navigating the transitions and the evolution that's becoming more and more apparent day by day. Anchor your work in impact and not identity, and not activity. I keep saying that because that is so critically important. So expand your skill stack. That could be emotional regulation, change management, analytics, all the things that I've referenced before. And let that be a way of future-proofing the work that you care deeply about on into the future of your career. But don't shrink your brilliance just to fit a shifting market. I want you to evolve it. Let's be on the front end of evolving it.
Awesome. Well, I'm just checking real quick, see if there are any other questions that come through. We normally try to cut this off at 45 minutes, and we are almost up on the hour. So I'm just going to use the last minute or two here just to say thank you so much, Dr. White, for being here. Dr. Rhea Horton, for just being a great coach here all year long. And we have one more session, which will be different. We've been doing lives all year, but this time we're going to invite people to jump on a Zoom link or a Google Meets link. I think it'll be Zoom, because I think we'll use the IDC's Zoom. So it'll be on Zoom. I think there were some people trying to log on, not realizing it was a live. So you'll have your opportunity, those that are listening in or watching the recording, where you'll be up here on stage with us. So that will be next month. We haven't come up with a date. I think we'll stay on here and figure that out. But again, thank you so much, Dr. White, Dr. Horton. Thank you for your time. Awesome. Those that were listening, thank you. You all have a wonderful day. I'm going to hit the end stream, and then we could